If I talked about episode 1, I guess I should talk about episode 2. Uzumaki, everybody. Yay! So there's a lot of things that happened post episode 1 that I didn't talk about, but I think it's very, very necessary to talk about now. One of the reasons it took Uzumaki so long to come out is because of production delays, specifically during the pandemic. The pandemic was hard on a lot of animation, especially when it came to anime. I feel like Western-wise it was easier to adapt to working from home than it was to studios in Japan, where I feel like it's a part of the working culture to be surrounded by being in an office. I do want to acknowledge that there are conflicting reports, both based on things DeMarco, the creative producer, has said. One in early 2020 stating that the pandemic hasn't affected them much during the makings of Uzumaki, and one done more recently in an interview with Vulture stating the pandemic basically had the show cancelled and they had to try their hardest to bring it back. There was a big discussion going on with all parties wondering if they should just cancel it and consider it a loss, if they should just do episode 1 and just leave it incomplete, or if they should tread through and do all 4 episodes no matter how rough it gets. And well, it's pretty obvious they chose the last one. I know that time period was hard for a lot of people, so personally I'm not gonna be as hard on them as everybody else probably are. Everybody hates episode 2, and it's mostly because of the animation. Remember the last video when I was praising the animation, saying it was unique and the shading was perfect, and when pausing it's very hard to tell it apart from the manga? Well, in this episode, it's still in black and white, and the sound and music still sound good to me. I'd even say the background designs still look really good to me. But something happened. The character models don't look right to me. They look different. Jagged, stiff. It looks like it's a very difficult task for them to move. So much so that it looks like they're just dragging the characters across the screen while in running animation. It doesn't look cohesive. And that's mainly because they were animated by a different studio. So a way a lot of companies offshoot production costs in their shows is to have them done overseas. Uzumaki was always announced to be co-animated by Studio Drive and Akatsuki. But episode 1 had a different studio down in the end credits, Fugaka, whom don't really have a lot of animation work on their belt compared to the other two. But what they did with episode 1 was so visually pleasing to the eye that when you jump to episode 2, you're in shock, you're appalled by the things you see. It's just very different. Katayama is a perfect example of this. In episode 1, he seems slimy, weird, and creepy compared to the other students in the school, like he didn't belong, but also you just felt bad for him. In episode 2, he just kind of seems like a fat kid, not as much detailed in the face as he was previously. There was still one image they did well though, when he sat down and they made attention be drawn to his back, which was pretty big, spiraling, and almost pulsating. I think the main issue I personally have with this is that when you compare it to the first company, it seems like this company doesn't know how to handle 3D models well. I'd say the 2D work doesn't seem bad, it almost just seems like the Japanese Tozen Macabre just in black and white, but what drives it down for me, and for a lot of people it seems like, especially when you look on the internet and see what clips all the people post, is the way they handle the 3D models. A lot of people had issues with the pacing as well. Personally speaking, I didn't really have a big problem with it. This was always going to be a 4-episode sprint, so I didn't think it was going to be paced that well. Where it is a negative onto it is that it's kind of hard to talk about what's going on within every episode. I did doing the research on this part, but when people were talking about this episode compared to the first, they said the first episode covered roughly 2 chapters and was kind of fastly paced, and the latter, episode 2, covered 5 chapters and was very rapidly paced, skipping over a lot of stuff. We get to see what spirals mean for a lot more people as well, also both metaphorically and literally. Kazunori and Yoriko both feel like their families are twisted and have spiraled into this evil form because they don't support their love. They end up planning to run away, but when the time comes, their family catches them sneaking out and chases them all the way to the beach where the 2 lovers begin to twist their bodies and coil up together and swim away. I did personally like this. I thought the twisting was really creepy, and I thought it was a good callback to early on in the episode where the 2 lovers saw these 2 snakes mating and they were twisted in in a similar way. We see this weird vicious spiral go on when Kasayama continues to get picked on by Samura, and eventually we see what the big spiral on his back was, because the next day at school, he's on the side of the building as a giant snail, just like that Gary episode. The cycle is that Samura still picks on him and eventually ends up feeling the same symptoms as he was, only to be turned into the same exact type of snail. The school decides to lock both of them in the same cage. And what does two animals without gender do when locked in the same cage? They mate. And they have eggs. It's very weird to think about. And the teacher thinks this exact same way, and that's why he goes out of his way to squish the eggs, just because of how weird it all is. He says they're not people anymore. It's weird, and he looks a bit mean. So guess what? He gets turned into a snail next. You could say this is represented as like the cycle of hatred, and how one person's hatred can spiral into others feeling the same way. That's just another theory for me. I like doing theories. And back to our main character, Kyrie, who didn't really have a lot going on within here. Her hair grew really long and was spiraling on the ends, which caused another student to spiral into jealousy, to do what she did, and inevitably died for the attention that she thinks she deserved. Now that I'm thinking about it, there is probably too much going on within here. Someone also spiraled out because of their love for Kyrie. They got hit by a car and was literally spun around the tire. Another spiral. And then we get the lighthouse stuff, which I hope gets more attention within the next episode, but I don't really have high hopes for. After a while, it just felt like they kept doing spot to make sure they hit certain things before the end of the episode, no matter how much stuff they cut out from the manga. You could say the production and development of the series spiraled out of control. But that's basically it. What are your opinions on episode 2 of Uzumaki? Leave them in the comments down below and I'll get back to you guys as soon as I can. I didn't really go into that much detail of the second episode, I feel like anyways. I left a little bit of stuff up for you guys to go check for yourselves, and I don't know, see how much you dislike it. See if you dislike it as much as other people. I don't dislike it, I just think it's a little bit disappointing compared to what episode 1 brought to the field. It feels like a step back into the Japanese Tales of the Macabre, a step back into the Juju Ito collection anime, instead of a step forward to what episode 1 of Uzumaki presented to us. But what are your opinions about it? Let me know and I'll get back to you guys as soon as I can. Okay, goodbye.